Marcus Carter, a 35-year-old homeowner with a passion for tending his sprawling backyard, had spent years cultivating a vibrant garden behind his modest suburban house. He had always enjoyed the routine of early morning watering, the gentle scuffle of wildlife rustling in the foliage, and the serene scent of freshly turned soil. When he first heard the rumble of machinery that Tuesday afternoon, he thought someone down the street was repaving a driveway. It wasn't unusual in a neighborhood dotted with aging homes. Yet, the noise kept getting louder, and when he looked out his back window, he spotted heavy construction equipment plowing straight through his prized rows of hibiscus and snapdragons. Confusion turned to alarm when he recognized his neighbor, Karen Whitfield, standing there with a clipboard in hand, directing the workers as though she owned the entire block. She was known around the area for her overbearing attitude and unwavering belief that all communal laws bent to her personal preferences. Marcus, in a mild panic, rushed outside to find a wide swath of his precious garden utterly destroyed, flattened into a makeshift path. Karen, looking oddly triumphant, gave him a curt nod and resumed overseeing the construction. The smell of churned dirt and diesel fumes hung in the summer air. In a calm, albeit strained tone, Marcus asked what exactly was going on, only to be told that Karen had decided to build a private driveway that conveniently cut right through his lot. According to her, she needed a more direct route to her house from the main road, and his garden provided the perfect shortcut. When he reminded her that it was his property, she waved him off, muttering something about an old easement clause and insinuating that it was technically open ground. Stunned by her audacity, Marcus tried pointing out that the entire area was clearly demarcated on his deed. Karen simply clicked her tongue, flashed a polite but dismissive smile, and told him he'd thank her later for increasing the value of his land. She pivoted and barked at the workers to keep going, ignoring Marcus as he tried to halt the machinery. That evening, the neighborhood hummed with gossip. A few curious onlookers gathered at the edges of Marcus's property, startled to see the backhoe carving a brand-new asphalt lane right through the garden he had spent years perfecting. Marcus caught wind of rumors that Karen had boasted about some long-forgotten right-of-way that, in her mind, gave her complete freedom to carve a chunk out of his yard. Most neighbors regarded Karen's claims with skepticism, but she tended to cow them into silence by dropping references to her numerous friends on the HOA board. Marcus was no stranger to her manipulative habits, though he had never personally crossed her until now. He spent the rest of the night poring over property records, calling the county office to confirm what he already knew. He alone had legal ownership of that land, no easement, no shared driveway, no special permission for Karen. Still, he planned to address the matter calmly, hoping that a civilized conversation would clear up the misunderstanding. By sunrise, Marcus was knocking on Karen's door, documents in hand. She answered in a silk dressing gown, hair meticulously styled despite the early hour, and offered him a condescending smile. When he politely asked her to review the property lines and the official plat map, she glanced for about 2 seconds before waving it away. She insisted she had her own proof, some vague reference to a local ordinance she couldn't quite produce. Marcus, determined to keep his cool, suggested they both speak to a neutral party or a legal professional. Karen gave a bitter laugh, reminding him that she had already invested money in this project and had no intention of stopping. Attempting a final olive branch, Marcus pointed out that she was destroying cherished flower beds, fruit trees, and even part of his greenhouse foundation. Karen shrugged, remarking that those elements could be replanted elsewhere, and that sometimes progress demands sacrifice. In reality, she seemed oblivious to how personal and catastrophic this was for him. Marcus next tried contacting the HOA, expecting to find some semblance of justice there. However, Karen had been on every committee imaginable over the past few years, and most board members were wary of challenging her. One or two hinted that they felt it was a civil matter, best left to the courts. That same day, Karen's hired crew nearly knocked over a small statue Marcus's late father had handcrafted, a sentimental piece he had placed at the heart of his garden. Furious but still reluctant to escalate the conflict beyond reason, Marcus confronted the foreman, who responded that Karen had told them everything in that garden was cleared for removal. Shocked, Marcus physically stood in front of the statue, forcing the workers to go around him. As the day wore on, the scraping and pounding of construction equipment felt like an assault on everything Marcus cherished. He felt the ground vibrating beneath his feet, every rumble rattling his resolve to stay peaceful. Over dinner, he realized that reasoning with Karen was like trying to negotiate with a runaway train. A line had been crossed. While swirling his fork around a plate of uneaten spaghetti, he remembered Karen's parting words that afternoon, you'll just have to adapt to the new arrangement. That's when a surge of determination sparked within him. If she wanted to push him into the corner, he would push back, but he needed a plan. His first step was to block the makeshift driveway. Early the next morning, Marcus hauled several large concrete planters, previously used to grow dwarf lemon trees, and placed them strategically across the new asphalt lane that cut through his garden. He spent hours maneuvering them by hand, ensuring they were heavily weighted down with soil and bricks. When Karen discovered this blockade, she marched up to him, voice shaking with a mix of outrage and triumph, and threatened to call the police. Marcus calmly handed her a copy of his property deed, stating that if the cops came, he'd be happy to show them who was actually trespassing on whom. Her face reddened, her composure slipping for the first time, but she still managed to sneer that he was just stirring up trouble. With clenched teeth, she dialed the police right in front of him. A patrol car arrived in the afternoon. 2 officers stepped out, slightly bemused by the sight of fresh asphalt running across half-finished flower beds and into a line of massive planters. Karen launched into a speech about property rights, how she was legally expanding her driveway, and how Marcus was obstructing a legitimate construction. She demanded that the officers force him to remove the barriers. Marcus, unflappable, showed them the official survey and pointed to the fence line that clearly demarcated his property, fence posts still visible despite the torn-up ground. The cops examined the paperwork, surveyed the site, and exchanged pointed looks. One asked Karen for her documentation supporting her claims. She hemmed and hawed, eventually admitting she had no formal permit or official survey backing her driveway extension. Frustrated, the officers told Karen this was a civil dispute, not a criminal matter, and they had no grounds to order Marcus to move his planters. Fuming, Karen accused them of bias and stormed off. While the officers left, Marcus felt a brief swell of relief. He had stood his ground, and at least that day, the law hadn't forced him to budge. Nevertheless, the asphalt scar remained. He knew Karen wouldn't stop, especially since she had thrown enough money into the project to pave half the town. He began sketching out his next move with a steely determination, vowing not to let her trample over him or his treasured garden again. With the police angle exhausted, Karen pivoted to a campaign of nuisance. She began hosting loud get-togethers each night, the thrum of music and burst of artificially cheerful laughter drifting well past midnight. Sometimes, the gathering spilled over to the newly paved section that lay behind her house, though it sat in Marcus's lot, turning his destroyed garden into a social space for Karen and her cronies. Marcus tried to maintain calm, but the constant trespassing, the trash left behind, and the bright floodlights pointed into his windows tested his patience. When he asked them politely to stop, Karen would respond by blowing him a sarcastic kiss and telling him he should have moved those planters. One weekend, Karen's nephew arrived, roaring into the driveway with a muscle car, doing donuts on the fresh asphalt, scattering dust and gravel across Marcus's windows. Trying to reason with the nephew led to a sneer and a dismissive rev of the engine. The sense of violation became so intense that Marcus found himself waking at dawn and staying up until midnight, just to monitor his property for any new surprises. He was a peaceful man, but the simmering resentment inside him grew every time he passed the once beautiful flowerbeds now destroyed by Karen's unstoppable vanity. Late that Sunday, he called an old friend named Naomi, a local attorney who specialized in property disputes. Over a cup of coffee, Naomi listened intently as Marcus recounted the entire fiasco, from Karen's brazen construction to the mocking parties. Naomi offered a few legal options: an injunction, a civil suit for property damage, possible trespassing claims. Marcus felt a wave of relief that there was a path forward, but these legal processes would take time, and Karen might continue to cause havoc in the interim. Still, Naomi assured him that if he documented every instance of trespass and vandalism, the courts would take it seriously. By the time Marcus left her office, he had a new sense of purpose. He vowed not just to block Karen's bogus driveway, but to make sure she learned a lesson she wouldn't forget. He began installing a discreet row of motion sensor cameras along his fence line, devices that would record any intrusion onto his property. Next, he started reaching out to neighbors who'd had prior spats with Karen. One by one, they shared stories of her meddling, from pressuring them to follow HOA guidelines she personally invented, to harassing them about everything from lawn ornaments to recycling bins. Marcus gathered testimonies and statements, determined to paint a broader picture of Karen's pattern of disregard. While he pressed forward with the legal route, he also prepared for a more immediate, tangible retaliation, something entirely lawful, yet devastatingly effective. He discovered his perfect opportunity when he learned that the local planning commission was holding a hearing about upcoming zoning adjustments in the area. Marcus spent an entire evening researching building codes, driveway setbacks, and property line regulations. He unearthed a local rule specifying that any new driveway crossing residential property without an official easement was considered an unapproved structure, and could be subject to hefty fines. Not only that, but the county also had the power to demand that any unauthorized paving be ripped out at the owner's expense. Marcus compiled a meticulous folder with photographs of the half-finished asphalt, the original property lines, and a record of Karen's brazen disregard for the permitting process. He knew if he timed this right, he could push Karen into a corner where she either faced enormous penalties or had to tear up the driveway herself. In the meantime, Karen kept doubling down on her bullying tactics. She penned letters to the HOA board alleging that Marcus was hoarding land that should be community property and that his planters were an eyesore. She even distributed bizarre flyers claiming that Marcus was preventing emergency vehicle access, endangering public safety. Most neighbors rolled their eyes. Those who knew him understood the truth, but Karen's brazenness still caused plenty of headaches. Then came the moment that left Marcus seething with fresh outrage. One of Karen's guests decided to slash open a few plastic trash bags near the planters, scattering debris across his yard. It was a brazen attempt to provoke him, presumably so he'd lash out publicly, letting Karen play the victim once more. Yet Marcus kept his composure, cleaning up the mess while quietly noting the vandal's face on one of his newly installed cameras. That same evening, he visited Naomi again to finalize the legal complaint and attach the photographic evidence. The complaint detailed Karen's destructive driveway project, her repeated trespasses, and the harassment that followed. A civil lawsuit was now officially in motion. The next steps were up to the Planning Commission's hearing, set for the following week. Marcus braced himself, knowing Karen was a master manipulator. But he also felt a deep confidence that he was ready for whatever she threw at him. On the day of the hearing, Marcus dressed in a neat button-down shirt and slacks, carefully packing his folder of evidence. Karen arrived in a bright red blazer, flanked by two of her closest allies, an HOA committee member and her perpetually disgruntled cousin. They strutted in with an air of entitlement, Karen thrusting papers at the commission's clerk and insisting that she had every right to build her driveway. Marcus watched from across the room as she dabbed theatrically at her forehead, muttering about overreach and bureaucratic nonsense. When his turn came, Marcus approached the podium calmly. He laid out the printed photographs showing the complete destruction of his garden, the property line markers, and the newly laid asphalt crossing into his land. He explained the sequence of events in a composed, factual manner, how Karen neither sought his permission nor obtained proper permits, and had even tried to weaponize the police against him when he blocked the unauthorized construction. He ended with a direct reference to county regulations about unpermitted driveways. One of the commissioners, a middle-aged woman in a conservative suit, raised an eyebrow at Karen's papers, in which Karen argued that she had long-standing verbal permission to cross Marcus's land. The commissioner asked for any documentation or witness to support that claim. Karen, cornered, began sputtering about a friendly handshake agreement from the previous owner of Marcus's home, but provided no real proof. Marcus's lawyer, Naomi, slid her own set of documents to the panel, showing that the previous owner had only lived there for 2 years before selling to Marcus, and had left no record supporting Karen's claims. It was a brutal takedown. For the first time, Karen's confident facade cracked. The commissioners deliberated. The head official slowly announced that Karen's project was in clear violation of county code, subject to immediate cease and desist. Moreover, she faced fines for unauthorized development, with potential further penalties if she failed to remove the illegal driveway. The hush that fell over the room felt like a judgment day. Karen's face went through a parade of emotions: disbelief, anger, desperation. She tried to interject, but the commissioners dismissed her protests, reminding her that they had all the evidence they needed. After the session closed, she marched up to Marcus, eyes blazing, hissing that he had ruined her plans and that she wouldn't forget this. Marcus simply nodded, telling her the only thing ruined here was his garden. She retorted by calling him a vindictive busybody, then stormed out. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The Planning Commission had done precisely what he'd hoped. But he still had one final card to play: his lawsuit. Within days, official county letters reached Karen, detailing the fines and mandating the removal of the unlawful driveway. Karen's response: she doubled down on her refusal, calling in another wave of contractors to complete her project, as if she thought she could outrun the county's enforcement. That futile maneuver earned her even stiffer penalties. Meanwhile, Marcus's civil suit gained momentum. He had photographic evidence of damage, trespass, harassment, and witness statements from neighbors. Karen countered by accusing him of property neglect, but that was easily disproven. Tension soared one evening when Marcus found Karen's workers attempting to remove the planters by force. They had managed to haul one aside before Marcus stepped in, phone recording every second. He warned them that they were damaging private property and, after showing them the county's official letter, the workers hurriedly packed up and left. Karen, furious and humiliated, glared from her porch. Her expression promised retribution, though she was running out of options. The next day brought a shocking twist. Karen attempted to claim the driveway was a public road extension. She went around the neighborhood collecting signatures, hoping to pressure the HOA board into labeling it a community thoroughfare. Marcus found out when one of his neighbors, an elderly man named Ron, rang his doorbell, describing how Karen tried to guilt him into signing by saying it would help the neighborhood. Ron refused. Others did too. Karen's ploy fizzled, leaving her more isolated than ever. That night, Marcus discovered a fresh piece of graffiti spray painted on his fence, the words, "Greedy Loser," scrawled in neon green. Another camera recording, another piece of evidence. Although enraged by the vandalism, Marcus refused to sink to her level. He meticulously documented the damage and sent it to Naomi. If Karen wanted a war, she now faced a legal juggernaut armed with a mountain of proof. Yet the final blow had yet to land. Marcus braced himself, certain that Karen would lash out in one last desperate attempt to salvage her pride. Karen's last stand came on a bright Saturday morning, 2 weeks after the Planning Commission's ruling. She strode onto Marcus's property without any invitation, a handful of typed papers fluttering in her grip. She declared that she had finally found a loophole that would render his lawsuit worthless. Marcus, exhausted by her theatrics, just shook his head and demanded she leave. She marched back and forth, pointing at the planters, the camera posts, and the lumps of rutted asphalt. She shouted about how the neighborhood was on her side, how she would countersue for emotional distress, and how Marcus would regret ever tangling with her. A trickle of neighbors gathered at a safe distance, watching the scene unfold. Karen's rant grew so heated that she barely noticed when a county enforcement officer pulled up in a marked vehicle. The officer had come to deliver a final notice. Karen was out of time. She owed thousands in fines and had a strict deadline to remove the illegal driveway. Failure to comply would result in the county removing it at her expense, plus additional penalties. The air crackled with tension as Karen read the notice, color draining from her face. In her rage, she turned on the officer, calling the enforcement a scam, and threatened to sue them for harassment. The officer remained stoic, politely suggesting she hire a demolition crew to tear out the driveway before the county stepped in. Watching Karen unravel, Marcus realized she had nowhere left to turn. She had burned her credibility with the HOA, alienated her neighbors, racked up fines, and faced an imminent civil case that almost guaranteed she'd be ordered to pay for property damage and emotional distress. With her illusions of control shattered, Karen stormed back to her house, slamming her door so hard it rattled the window panes. The small audience dispersed, a quiet hum of relieved chatter passing among them. Marcus stood alone on his driveway, gazing at the destroyed portion of his garden. Bittersweet satisfaction coursed through him. The final chapter was near. In the following week, Karen's downfall became gossip fodder across the neighborhood. Rumors circulated about the staggering amounts she owed in fines, the multiple code violations, and her frantic attempts to secure a loan just to pay legal fees. Contractors posted notices on her front door, demanding overdue payments for the half-finished project. The brand-new asphalt had begun to crack under the scorching sun, an ugly metaphor for Karen's crumbling empire. Meanwhile, Marcus pressed on with the lawsuit. Naomi filed additional motions to ensure restitution for the ruined garden. The once lush space could be replanted, but the cost to restore it to its original glory was significant. Karen, out of options and money, made a last-ditch plea to settle. Through her new attorney, an overworked public defender she'd apparently hired cheaply, she offered to pay partial damages if Marcus would drop the case. Marcus refused. He wanted full compensation, not just for the tangible losses, but to send a clear message that no one could trample on his life's passion without severe consequences. Days later, Karen arrived at a settlement conference, looking haggard and defeated. Gone was the flashy outfit, replaced by a wrinkled blouse and anxious eyes. She tried to charm the mediator, claiming she never meant any harm, but all the evidence pointed to deliberate trespass. Seeing no viable escape, she agreed to a settlement that forced her to finance the complete removal of the illegal driveway and to compensate Marcus for every cent of the damage. Additional clauses required her to publicly acknowledge responsibility. For Marcus, this was a moment of vindication. Yet the cost to Karen was far more than monetary. Her reputation was in tatters, her relationships with local officials scorched. Even the few allies she had left were distancing themselves, unwilling to be tainted by her fiasco. When the settlement's details became public knowledge, it sealed her fate in the community. People talked openly about how she had lied, cheated, and harassed a neighbor just to create an unpermitted shortcut. By the time the dust settled, Karen was forced to put her house on the market, a hasty decision fueled by crippling debts. The last Marcus heard, prospective buyers balked at the mess on the property and at the rumors swirling about its previous owner. The presence of a half-torn driveway scarring the backyard certainly didn't help. For Marcus, though, a sense of calm descended. He strolled through his battered garden, imagining the replanting he'd do over the coming months. While the remnants of Karen's asphalt still marred the landscape, he felt a renewed optimism. The court's ruling meant he'd have the resources to restore the land. He vowed to rebuild it even better, a testament to resilience in the face of bullying. Passing neighbors offered cheerful words, some stopping to say they were glad justice had finally been served. Marcus, though never one to revel in another person's misery, couldn't deny a deep sense of satisfaction. Karen had started this war by wrecking his sanctuary. It was only fitting that she ended up in a ruin of her own making. And so, the story concluded in a swirl of papers and excavators. Under court order, a demolition crew arrived to tear out the last of the illegal driveway. Neighbors watched as Karen's dream project was pulverized into rubble. She stood on her porch, arms folded across her chest, eyes brimming with a mixture of hatred and regret. No one sympathized with her. The site that once echoed with the grating sound of machinery now lay eerily quiet, a blank canvas for Marcus to heal and renew. In the final moments of that day, as the crew loaded chunks of broken asphalt onto a truck, Karen slipped into her car. Wordless, she backed out of her front gate and disappeared down the street, possibly for the last time. The next week, a small "for sale" sign appeared on her lawn, swaying gently in the breeze. Marcus, for his part, spent long hours planning out new sections in his garden. He intended to replant even more vibrant flowers, add a decorative fence, and dedicate a space to a new greenhouse. His settlement funds would cover part of it, but the sense of triumph went deeper than any financial gain. He had faced down someone who believed she could commandeer his property at will, and he had stood firm. Though he would never get back the time and peace of mind lost to the ordeal, he had defended what mattered most to him. The rumors about Karen's humiliation spread throughout the county, painting her as a cautionary tale of hubris. And every so often, neighbors still whispered the story of how she had built a driveway through Marcus's beloved garden and then tried to call the cops when he dared to stop her. Those who heard it shook their heads in amazement that someone could be so brazen. Yet the real moral was always about the quiet strength Marcus had shown. He hadn't bowed to bullying, he hadn't been intimidated by false authority, and in the end, justice had prevailed. Months later, the garden once again burst with color, the newly planted blooms dancing in the warm breeze. Marcus would occasionally pause to watch the butterflies flit between blossoms, recalling the chaos that had befallen this place not long ago. In its place was a renewed beauty that felt earned, a tangible reminder that rightful ownership, backed by unwavering resolve, could overcome even the most outrageous claims. And somewhere far beyond the neighborhood's boundaries, Karen likely nursed her wounded pride, grappling with legal bills and the memory of a spectacular failure. But for everyone else, life moved forward, leaving behind the cautionary legend of the driveway that never should have existed.